The FBI is now deeming certain words to be extremist. Now, the FBI and in tandem with other federal agencies like the DHS, they've always had memos that they've put out covertly. Well, let me say discreetly. So they put it out publicly, but it's very discreet, so not many people see the memos. But these memos have gone out, and they are, these federal agencies, they're targeting specific people and specific words, okay? So now they're targeting a demographic of the population, a portion of the demographic, and they're targeting certain words because they're aligning these words with people within the demographic that they're targeting. Now, why are they targeting certain words? Why are they targeting the demographic that they're targeting? It's because these people are a threat to their political regime. Now, when you have a ruling regime, what do they want? They want control over the masses. A lot of people may be skeptical and say, well, the government is, sure, they have authority and they're an institution, but they're a credible and trusted institution. These are the institutions that support our communities, that support our society. Well, let's take a further look into these institutions. These institutions, yes, there are a lot that are credible, that are trustworthy, but a large majority of them are corruptible. People are infallible, okay, or people are fallible. So they have flaws, or and it's sometimes not even just flaws, but they're intentionally malicious to a point where they're chasing X, Y, and Z interests, and those interests happen to misalign with your personal interests as a private citizen. So a lot of these words, red pill, based, these are specific words that are being categorized as extremists. Now, once you have the federal government come out and say that they're targeting extremists, and these extremists are no longer terrorists, or they're no longer these fringe radical groups, but they're actually groups here domestically in the United States, and these groups are people on forums, people like incels. I mean, there's a whole host of people and different communities that the federal government is targeting. Now, if you look into, I'll use a couple of these examples. So, red pill. Now, there's a few ways that we can look into red pill. Red pill stem from the Matrix. You take the red pill, you're awakened, you're enlightened, you see reality for what it is. Or you take the blue pill and you go back to the dream world, and you're being shown this facade, but you're okay with the facade because you're more comfortable in that skin of the facade. And then out of that bred the red pill community, which is just data and observation, typically around relationships, but you can expand it much further than that, but it's data and relationships. Then people will come in and they'll twist it, they'll throw in their opinion, or they'll provide certain prescriptions. Some are good, some are bad. So when you look at these people and they're, let's just say objectively, they're looking at data and observation. So they're creating statistics, they're looking at facts, they're seeing reality for what it is, and they're quote unquote based, right? I'm throwing another term in there that the FBI has classified as extremist. Based is the opposition to woke, right? Woke used to mean based, but woke has become something that has been distorted and perverting reality into fantasy world. If you look at, if someone says they're based, right? Someone says they're based, that means they're seeing what reality truly is versus a false narrative that is being portrayed to the general population, right? So the average person is getting an illusion while you're seeing past the illusion, and therefore you're based. So these words are targeting the people who actually see through the facade. Now, there is a facade behind the political regime, or rather, there's a facade in front of the political regime. Behind the facade is when you see behind the curtain. So if anyone has seen The Wizard of Oz, I know it's an old movie, but there's the Wizard of Oz is the man who has a voice, and it's heard all throughout the city. And he's supposed to be like the creator, the god. He's supposed to be almighty. It turns out at the end of the movie, spoiler alert if you haven't seen it, he is just a man behind a curtain who's using machinery to project his voice onto the city so that people can hear his voice in a godly manner, right? That is the illusion, that is the facade that guy created in the land of Oz. Now, the ruling party in any situation, so it doesn't just have to be the United States of America, although the United States of America, we are more democratic than all the other nations, but because we are democratic, it doesn't mean we don't have a facade. It just means that the facade is hidden a little bit better than all these other nations. So all these other nations, they can be very overt with how they're going to run their nation. They can show up with their military in front of polls, in front of ballots, and intimidate people, and do it in such an overt manner because they have such a physical presence of force and authority that the majority of people have just been brought up in the system as such, right? So if you're born and you grow up and you're 30 years old and you've been born in a certain system, that system is considered the status quo to you. The status quo most people don't question it. Most people don't look into the status quo. There's something that Steve Jobs had said, of course, a long time ago, where people, and I don't wholly agree with it, but it's a very factual statement in a sense. People like you and me have created the system around us. People like you and me have created the status quo around us. What you don't, and I'm saying what he was saying, not specifically verbatim, but I'm paraphrasing. What you don't understand is that if you identify the system around you and you poke and you prod, you can actually move things around. You can actually change things. And so if you poke over here, you may get something over here, right? Cause and effect. So you can actually change the status quo. Most people don't identify that. Most people don't see that. But you will have the minority of the people, of the population, who do see that. Some are good, some are malicious. And they will poke and prod, and they will change the status quo to their ideology. Now imagine you have all these different people throughout time. Let's just say at the current present moment, you have a few thousand people. These are, of course, a few thousand compared to a few 7 billion. That's the minority of the population. They're poking and they're prodding because they want to change the status quo to their ideology. Their ideology, not all of their ideologies agree, but they do have to find common interests where they do agree, where they do intersect, and that's how they're able to change society in a more effective manner, right? This is what we call the establishment in our United States political system. So when you have a political system, and I like to use North Korea because North Korea is a perfect present example of an authoritarian regime that has enacted all of the things that current nations are trying to enact. Now, I will say the way that current nations want to enact what North Korea has enacted, they want to do it in a similar way, but a very different way, because North Korea is only able to do what they're doing because they're subsidized by China. If they were not subsidized by China, they would have to make sure that their labor force is much stronger than what it is right now, because right now their labor force is very weak by design, but North Korea is able to get resources from China. Therefore, they're able to have that weak labor system, so they can still produce resources, or at least have access to resources. Okay, they don't produce much, so they're getting everything from China. China likes it because they have a synergistic alignment politically. So North Korea, what they do is, first of all, like I said, you're born into the system. Now, after 3 generations, let's say your grandfather, your grandmother is gone. Even right now, your grandfathers and your grandmothers don't really speak to you about their time, at least in detail, and they don't get really intricate into the politics of it, the financials of it. You know, they may have stories, but they're not going deep. The majority of the population, their grandparents, their grandfathers, their grandparents in general, are not going deep into details about the current system of the status quo and how things are changing. Most people are not enlightened to that. But let's say in North Korea, after those 3 generations, everyone is pretty much just brought up into the system, and you don't really question it. And so well, let me start from the beginning. North Korea, what they will do, and what they have done, and what they currently do, is they will remove words. First, they'll target the words because you have to demonize the words. Then you have to gain public sentiment to want to classify certain words as hate speech or extremist, and then you can go after those people or go after those words. So now if those people don't want to be targeted, they don't use those words. They don't use that vernacular. Then once those words are no longer in use, over time, those words are removed from the word bank. Those words don't even exist to you, right? So hunger and love, for example, does not exist in North Korea. Now, the feeling of hunger, you will feel that, but you won't know how to express it. The feeling of love is a little bit more complex, and so it's easier for people in North Korea to understand what hunger is, because they have an innate feeling towards that, an innate instinct towards hunger to satisfy their stomach. But love is slightly different, a little bit more abstract. Then you'll remove concepts and ideologies. And when you remove that, now you're taking vocabulary, you're taking concepts, you're taking ideologies, you're taking ideas. This is how people communicate. Like in a free world, in a free society in America, even right now we can't completely communicate freely online, but let's say you're having a private conversation with someone who is based, because there are a lot of people who you'll have a conversation with, and you'll have to censor yourself because there's a certain power dynamic. Maybe they're your boss, you can't really say certain ideas because they don't understand, or they may take it the wrong way. So let's say you're talking to someone who's on the even playing field with you, okay, they're a peer, and you're speaking with them freely. You're taking whatever's in your mind, okay? I'm not saying everyone's perfect, but you're taking what's in your mind, your ideas, your thoughts, concepts, philosophy, whatever it is, and you're using your words to articulate yourself to that person. Now you're trying to convey what's in your mind to that person, and your words are, the design is supposed to be that your words are being used in such a way that the other person understands as one-to-one, in a one-to-one ratio, what you're thinking in your mind. That's what language is for. That's very difficult because what's in your mind and how you feel and what you're thinking, even you yourself as an individual, may change on that one-to-one even 10 minutes later. Like how you feel about something right now may change 10 minutes later based off of something else in your environment, some other stimuli. But you're trying to convey what's in your mind in a one-to-one ratio to someone else. That's a very difficult task to do. Not many people are able to do that properly. That other person also needs to understand it and then be able to reciprocate if he or she can understand you one-to-one, and then reciprocate in his or her one-to-one ratio. That's what language is for. That's what communication is for. Now, humans have we have a few good skills: adaptation, teamwork, using our opposable thumbs to build tools. But language is a huge one. So language has enabled us to communicate effectively so we can actually work in teams. So we can actually work with 10 other guys to take down a bison, right? That is a very useful skill for humans. Now, once you start chopping a man's tongue off, what you're effectively doing is you're not necessarily proving that he or she is spreading disinformation or misinformation, although that's what the governments want us to think. But you're enacting a phase in the control system where you can now have more dominion over the culture, right? Because language contributes to culture. So even if people want to look at the etymology of words, which is like the definition of words and the semantic language of words, or semantic language of vocabulary, and how it goes back, we can go back 200 years, and how one word was used 200 years ago could have a totally different meaning right now, or maybe the denotation is the same, but the connotation is different, or maybe vice versa. So when you have a regime like North Korea, and they're able to get rid of words, and so you don't feel hungry, so therefore hunger doesn't exist. You don't feel love, so now you can remove that emotional bond between parent and child. You have more authoritarian control. This is just one narrow compartment of what is required to accumulate more power over time and to maintain a status quo and have an establishment further progress towards a centralized authority. So this doesn't fare well most of the time. I mean, tyranny has been in existence for 99% of human history, so we are actually due to our evolution, most people succumb as being a sheep, right? They just go with the masses. Where this stems from is we were in small tribes back in the day, 1 to 300 members, and you did not want to be outcasted or ostracized from the tribe, because if you were out alone in the wilderness, you would most likely not survive. So you did not want to be outcasted, and there was a hierarchy in the tribe. Men go off of hierarchies, and you would have the hierarchy, and you would have to submit to that hierarchy. Now, you take that and you scale it to our populations that we have now, where you have tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people and nations. And then you have some nations that are more authoritarian than others. They will want to enact certain ideologies, and they have to think about, okay, what do we do that will match with the evolutionary psychology of humans to ensure that we can have more control over people? So first you get rid of words. Now, you can't just overtly get rid of words. I mean, you can if you have enough physical presence and force, but you want to do it culturally so that people voluntarily give it up, right? If you can have people give up their own rights versus you are forcefully taking their rights away, this is like the frog in the boiling water analogy. You can take a frog, this is theoretical, although maybe someone's tried it out. You can take a frog, you can put him in warm water, and you slowly turn the water hotter and hotter. The frog won't jump out because he doesn't notice that the water is getting progressively warmer. If the water is already boiling and you throw a frog in it, it'll jump out. It sees the dramatic change between the room temperature in air and boiling hot water in a liquid. If you gradually change things, which is you're changing the culture, and people voluntarily succumb to the censorship to getting rid of their words and not using the vocabulary in their language, you are effectively doing what you want to do, but people think that they're doing what they want to do. So you have to get public sentiment to adjust culture. This affects the language and words, and we're seeing it right now even in the West. I mean, I'm talking about North Korea, but in the West, there's already mass censorship everywhere. So you get rid of the words, then you attack concepts, ideas, you go after the more difficult things. You have to target people, you have to demonize groups. This is not uncommon phenomenon. We can look at World War II, for example. I always use World War II because that's what most people are taught in public schools. There's plenty more examples, like Pol Pot was not taught in public schools. The amount of people who perished under Mao and Stalin, that was not really taught. The gulags were not really taught. But World War II, Germany, everyone knows about that because that's the most popular incident that is taught in our public education system. For a good reason that I can't talk about. Now, we have, in World War II Germany, of course, there was a population that was demonized, and it was a gradual thing. It didn't happen overnight. Like, well, I can't even say the names. I don't even think I can say the names. I'll get censored. So, in World War II, there were people that were demonized, but this happened over years. So you look at these people and you say, well, we're scapegoating them for our financial issues. At the time, Great Depression, 1929, we're dealing with financial issues. This is lasting all of the 1930s, and these people are the scapegoats. And how are they the scapegoats? Well, you don't have to come up with a reasonable, logical, sound reason. You can come up with an emotional reason because people use emotion to dictate most of their decisions. So these people are the scapegoat. They're the root of all of our financial issues. Then you say, okay, well, now they're dirty and they're vermin, right? They're vermin. They're like rats on the street. We need to clean up the street. So we have to segregate and separate them from the rest of civilization. And then you escalate it, and you keep escalating it over time. And it's a gradual progression that people don't necessarily notice. It's not a dramatic shift. What was a dramatic shift and what did wake a lot of people up, not just in the world, but especially in the West, was what happened a few years ago, where we saw everything was running as normal, economy was good, minorities were making the most money they had ever made, the stock market was extremely high, we were getting good trade deals overseas. All of a sudden, we got a lockdown. Everything was shut down. Certain businesses were deemed to be okay because apparently they're not affected by the pandemic, but other businesses had to be shut down. And funny enough, these businesses were small businesses, but the big businesses who had a lot of lobbying power and who had a lot of power in terms of interest with politicians, they could stay open. And so these bigger businesses, they consolidated more power and resources. These smaller businesses got shut down. This was people's life's work. They don't exist anymore. Barely any help was given to small business. I know there was a SBA loans, but it didn't really help much. In fact, a lot of the bigger businesses got the loans. So we saw a situation where it was so immediate that a lot of people woke up. They started to question the narrative. Hold on, this happened all of a sudden. Now, I will say that was a mistake by the people from the top of the hierarchy who wanted to puppeteer everything, but they wanted it too quick. They wanted it too soon. So a lot of people woke up and they spoke out. And because they spoke out, that's when we saw a lot of the different platforms start to censor people, because people were speaking out about the facade. They were speaking out about the illusion. And of course, you have the people in the establishment who want their narrative to be portrayed to the population, and they didn't like that people were speaking out. Oh, they saw, oh crap, a lot of these people are actually waking up. They're based, right? They took the red pill, and now they're seeing the facade for what it really is. They're seeing our actions as non-trustworthy. And therefore, we need to silence them because, of course, silence is the best option. And if they have the tools, they're going to silence people. Now, we're at a situation where the silencing is no longer working because, of course, there's still censorship, and that's not okay by every regard of our American values. But we have to understand there's a power dynamic here. We cannot let ruling regimes have mass control over us in terms of dictating our words. And so I'm glad to say that there are other platforms that are out there, and they're building, and they're being built by intelligent people who actually have the values of the First Amendment. Even though the First Amendment only really ties you to the government is using indirect ways. They're using platforms as a proxy to go after your First Amendment. So it's still unconstitutional. It's still treasonous. And of course, a lot of these people are not held accountable for that. But there are platforms who are building, and they're hosting people who can freely speak. Now, there are still restrictions, and so it's not fully absolute, but it's better than what it was just a few years ago. And so we're seeing people like Elon Musk, who has taken over Twitter. He bought Twitter. Personally, at least short-term, bad business deal. Long-term, maybe if he's able to adjust it, good business deal. But he still doesn't allow some people on for very emotional reasons, not an objective reason, not a logical, sound reason. But for the most part, now a lot of people who were banned before are now able to go on Twitter. We also saw the Twitter files, so we saw a lot of documents and information that was released where, okay, now we actually have some, not just circumstantial, but direct evidence of collusion between corporation and government. That's fascistic, right? So now we're seeing World War II Germany all over again, just in a different type of facade. And by the way, World War II Germany it wasn't independent at the time. It actually had links to British England and even the United States of America. And maybe we can have that discussion in the future. But what we really need to focus on is our words not being censored. Our words, it's mainly a cultural attack, right? So if people start to see, oh, these terms are considered extremists and these words are tied to a certain demographic and these people are radicals, they're extremists. But these are the people who should be shut down, and you shouldn't use those words and you shouldn't associate yourself with these people. Of course, there are bad people out there. We need to question this because the federal government, these agencies, it's not like it's just the FBI. There are so many different federal agencies. There are I believe over 100 different federal agencies. I can't even name them all. And they have unrestrained power, unrestrained resources, and they're targeting people who are their political opponents. So it's not like they're doing anything unconstitutional or unlawful. They're just political opponents. And the way that the current ideology that is in power goes after them is not through, well, they do lawfare, but not through legal means, but through unconstitutional, illegal means, unlawful means of, we have enough power and force. We're going to create a little bit of a facade because we are in a nation that is slightly more democratic than the rest of the nations. But make no mistake, this is akin to having a physical presence of force being enacted upon the people. We just need to change culture. Once we change culture, we can adjust political policy, even though it's unconstitutional, like the Patriot Act in 2001, or like this TikTok bill that's trying to go through, the Restrict Act. But it doesn't have anything about TikTok. It's a lot. Let me go to the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act made an excuse to create separate types of courts where you can have easier warrants to issue regarding terrorism. Now, what is considered terrorism? We can define it in a very specific manner, but how the federal government defined it in the Patriot Act was very broad. Anyone can be considered a terrorist. And so now they can bypass the Fourth Amendment. And so this bill was largely unlawful, but because you had a lot of public sentiment, the bill was passed and people went along with it, just like we all have the US dollar. I hold a $1 bill, $50 bill, $100 bill. It only works because we all agree that it works. There's faith in the institution of the United States, or rather the Federal Reserve, of issuing currency in the denomination of dollars. So when everyone is okay with the Patriot Act, because at the time we had 9/11 and the vast majority of the population had public sentiment to nationalize and go after X, Y, and Z enemies. And yeah, this bill is required so that we can go after our enemies. I'm not personally agreeing with that. I'm saying how the federal government framed it as. That's when everyone went with it, not realizing that it's unconstitutional. But people said, the hell with the Constitution. This is necessary in our time of need. We need to go after these people. Now, the reason why we have the Constitution, the reason why we have the Bill of Rights, absolute rights, is to prevent this very kind of issue from happening. Because now we have a law where most people are going with it, they're going along with it, but it's infringing on your right. And the people in power, the people who have access to force, can abuse this and use these words on a document to substantiate their claim of why they're going after you. And so they can use all their unconstitutional laws, all their unconstitutional bills and executive orders to frame lawfare, to frame force under the guise of, we're doing something here that's legal, but really it's not legal. They've only made it legal through the effort of manipulation, adjusting culture, and then people go along with the culture.